Hello and welcome to the Tuesday afternoon radio show with your host, Randall Martin. So glad you could join us this afternoon. Hey, we're going to pick up and continue with an interview that we started early in February. And it was a promo to this interview with Lisa Flood.
Fludd-Smith.
Oh, Lisa Fludd-Smith. And she
Uh-huh.
is a wonderful historian in our region that really focuses on the Black experience here in Hudson and Columbia County throughout the years. How far do you go back?
Well, in terms of my research, I go back all the way to 1624 when the first Dutch people came here. That doesn't necessarily include, like, the first Africans didn't get here till 1627, but
Okay.
you kind of have to cover the whole period. We got 400 years here. That's
I
big.
know. I know. And this is actually, I was going to ask you: are you playing a role in this 250th anniversary of America? And I know that Columbia County is doing a bunch of celebrations. Are you playing a role in that?
Yeah, listen, I do a lot of speaking. I will continue doing speaking. We are putting together events for the fall.
Okay.
We are hopefully going to be participating in the county parade that I know they're asking folks to put together floats and things for.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I will actually have a meeting about that later on this afternoon. So hopefully we'll be participating in that in some way. But also for us, the significance of 2027 is actually kind of bigger.
Okay.
So I'm putting a lot of effort into commemorations for that year.
And explain what you mean. Why is it bigger in 2027?
Well, 2027, from our perspective, from the Black history perspective,
Uh-huh.
would be 400-year anniversary since the first enslaved people came to New Netherland, to New York, right?
Okay.
But it's also the 200-year anniversary of the legal ending of enslavement in 1827 in New York State. So we have a double anniversary going on next year. And,
Okay.
we are one of the very few Black history organizations in the Hudson Valley. So that's a big thing to us.
That's a huge thing, and I didn't know that. And a lot of times when you think about the ending of slavery, I think of 1865 when it ended for the nation. But it's
Right.
it's a little bit lost in the fact that it did end in New York 40 years, about 40 years prior.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we always focus on 1865, right? That's like what's sort of ingrained in us from childhood. But by the time the Civil War was being fought, the last enslaved people, who were at that point called indentured servants, had been free from their servitude in New York State for at least 2 decades, right? So the last. I refer to them as enslaved. The law referred to them as indentured servants. But, if you're giving free labor to someone who owned your mother, to me, that's enslavement, right?
Right.
So the very last of those people who were in that category were released from their indenture by the 1840s, right? So by 1865, we're fighting the war. It's been long over in, not long over, but it's been over for a while in New York State.
Now, did it occur in New York, then right after in the South and after Reconstruction, the few years of Reconstruction, then you had Jim Crow laws that really tried to return people to an impoverished, indentured servitude type of a situation. Did that happen in New York after the legal ending of slavery in New York?
Well, listen, it's never been easy for us, right? No
True,
matter what the
true.
situation is, it's never been easy for us. We didn't have the legal, actually legislated acts against us as we did post Reconstruction. There wasn't legalized Jim Crow, but it was there in the way we were treated in certain instances. So I would say it wasn't as intense as in the South. It wasn't legal as it was in the South, but it was definitely there. It was definitely there. Our treatment has never been easy.
Were people allowed to then, like, so now you're free, now kind of that adjustment, but what do you do? Because, in theory, people were granted that whole also that 40 acres and a mule, which occurred for a few, not many, down south.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any sort of reparation or kind of economic start ramp up for people here, or was it just now you're not going to be my slave, get out of my house?
Yeah, there really wasn't much for us. There really wasn't. There was, because of the nature of it being done so slowly, there were definitely instances where um, the former enslavers would help out the people they enslaved, would help them get started. But
Uh-huh.
it was not um, on a wide basis. That was a very individualized thing.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So we didn't get that 40 acres and a mule. And I always say, if they want to hand me 40 acres of prime New York real estate now, I'll take it.
Oh,
But like,
absolutely.
we didn't get it.
Absolutely. you know, I was thinking about this before our interview and after our last interview, and we've talked a couple of times on the
Mhm.
radio. I met you in person, but
Mhm.
the work that you do is so important.
Thank you.
Documenting it, keeping records, um, and we talked a little about you and your mom and how this is almost like a family journey, or it is a family journey, and
Yeah.
continuing recording this history. What got you started, and why is this such a passion for you?
Ooh. What got me started is I'm just curious.
Okay.
That's really um, growing up. Now, so I was born in Albany, right? So, and
Hmm.
my family is all up there. So even when I was in elementary school, my parents and I moved away, but I was up there every summer, every school break with my grandparents. And on my mother's side, I really didn't know anything about that family. They really didn't talk about it. Like, I knew that my grandmother grew up in Stuyvesant, and that her mother had grown up in Kinderhook, and that was really it. Um, my mom had these pictures of these little, short, tiny black ladies that were just like referred to as the aunts or the cousins, and
Hmm.
I didn't know who they were. So I saw one day, I was just looking around through, I don't even remember what. I saw a picture that was the same picture as one of the ladies that my mom had. And I was like, wait, how can that be? And it turned out it was on the cover of a booklet that had been written for a Black History event at the Columbia County Historical Society some years back, I think in like the 80s. And that's kind of piqued my interest. I'm like, well, wait, how come this lady who I think is related to me is on this book?
Mm.
And that's kind of what got me started in, oh, there's might be something deeper that I don't know about going on here. But it is very much an endeavor of passion for me. Every new ancestor that I discover, or honestly that my husband discovers, because he does most of the hardcore genealogy work, um,
Hmm.
is like a new. It's like adding a petal to a flower. It really is. It's everything is new and fresh and something else I can find out about. We share, my husband and I share a desk where we sit face to face. It's a really huge desk. And he'll sometimes say to me, oh, I found you a new cousin. And then I'm like all excited. I'm like looking at him like, okay, where's this cousin from?
Wow.
Where
Okay.
who is this one? You know, so yeah, it's a passion project, and it really feels so grounding, right? It gives me a real strong sense of roots in the community and in the country. Even though I haven't actually lived in Columbia County, it makes me feel very rooted there.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's a special thing. And also, now that we have started this organization, to be able to help other people find their Columbia County roots is huge. I mean, people really, really appreciate that, because we don't charge for it. People will come to us and say, I heard I had this uncle, whatever. Can you help me? And we'll give them, a direction to look and whatever documents we can find real quickly. So it feels good to me to be able to do this for other people as well.
And that's a wonderful gift for people to find out about their past, their history. And I wonder if we really have a proper appreciation of how hard it was, that life, and the fortitude people had to have in order to overcome those circumstances and still have hope and joy and pass that down and somehow intuitively know that in the future it will be better.
Yeah, listen, I think about that a lot when I read these things. I'll just give you an example. I was doing research on an ancestor named Anthony Van Allen, right? And he was in
Hmm.
Kinderhook, and he had, over the course of about 10 years, he and different women, I don't know, because I can't prove what their relationships were. I'm assuming maybe one was a wife, maybe both, all three were wives, I don't know. But he
Okay.
had three children, right? So he had a daughter who was born in New York State in the 1790s. And then he had a son that was born in Massachusetts just after 1800. And then another
Hmm.
son who was born back in New York in the early 1800s. All three of those children were under a different legal status. So his
Interesting.
oldest child would have remained enslaved for the rest of her life. But his middle child, by being born in Massachusetts, where slavery had already been abolished, was a free man for his entire life.
Oh, wow.
And then his youngest child would have been born in that twilight period where he would have remained indentured, quote unquote, to the owner of his mother until he was 28 years old. And when
How
I saw, right? I know.
he?
When I
How
read
did he
that,
have
I was
such
like, that's
mobility?
amazing.
How did he? Why was he getting around from state to state,
Yeah.
or was he
Well, you know what?
transferred?
There was a lot of lending. There was a lot of
Okay.
lending and renting and leasing.
Okay.
So if you didn't need your enslaved person for a few months, or it wasn't the planting season but somebody else could have used them, you could rent them, you could lease them to
Wow.
somebody else for a time period. And that happened a lot, and sometimes it was for years and there were actual contracts for it. I lease my enslaved person, Sarah, to this other guy for 3 years in exchange for X number of dollars and a couple bushels of wheat or whatever it was. There were like really detailed contracts for those kinds of things.
Wow. And you think about, and I was talking about fortitude and, the sort of the will to survive past this, but then you think in those instances, what the incredible lack of stability and control over your own destiny, even day to
Right.
day, where you were going to be, or where your children were going to be, or where your
Yeah.
wife was going to be, like that complete lack of stability and control over what seems today like the most basic of things had to be extremely hard to deal with, because how do you plan if I don't know, well, I could be, another place tomorrow, my kids could be, I
Right.
could be separated from my kids. I mean, again, it almost boggles the mind for me to think about the hurdles that people had to go through, enslaved people had to go through here, and then still come out the other end just kind of whole, and being able to then have families and have resiliency in order to then move and become, our predecessors that enabled us to be here.
Yeah, listen, I'm not sure I could do it. I have so much respect for how the ancestors lived and survived and thrived, because I have three children. I would die
Mm,
if someone took my child away
right. Yeah.
and sold them someplace else and I might never see them again, or my partner. I can't even imagine somebody saying, okay, well, now you have to go live in Massachusetts with somebody else. You don't have any control over it. You don't, like, it really is honestly so mind-boggling to me, the lack of agency that
Mm,
that our ancestors lived with. It is incredible fortitude. And I'm actually just writing an essay right now that I'm finishing up, that's called Resilience is Our Love Language.
Okay.
And it really is, it's all about how we have that resilience and we have the ability to resist in certain ways the things that are happening to us. So sometimes there were like, you might do a work slowdown, or you might try and negotiate a situation, or if your child is, say, quote unquote, sold to another person,
Mm-hmm.
the ability to think, well, the other enslaved people in that household will care for my child, right? We
Right.
help each
Okay.
other. We
Okay.
formed relationships. We formed alternate families in order to support each other because we were all being, tossed around without any ability to control it ourselves. And we do those things out of love. We did those. Our ancestors did those things out of love for ourselves and for our community. We all knew we were all in this situation, and how can we do the best for each other?
Right.
You
But
know,
but we're stuck. We're stuck, but not defeated.
right?
And
Exactly.
ooh,
Exactly.
this is again, it's just this enormous thing that you think about, this enormous period of time. And you touched on something that I guess I knew but never really thought about, because you said, you mentioned about the time period in which slavery was abolished in Massachusetts. And,
Hmm.
again, I never really thought about it. But when was that exactly? And how long was it before it was in New York?
So in Massachusetts, I believe it was 1783. So it was a
Whoa.
long time before we even started gradual emancipation in New York State, because we didn't start gradual emancipation until 1799. So, and a lot of that, part of that was because of the pressure of our neighboring states saying, okay, well, our enslaved people are already free. And you had people, running away because, listen, especially if you're in Columbia County,
Right, right. You could,
getting to Massachusetts is right easy, you
right.
know, right? Getting to Vermont is not that hard. So you can, there was definitely movement in that area. I've been doing a lot of research recently on families in Hillsdale,
Mm.
and enslaved families in Hillsdale were going back and forth across the border into Massachusetts. So there's definitely like movement back and forth. And sometimes it's being leased, sometimes it's being sold, sometimes it's just you have relatives over there, you're going to go visit them if you possibly can, right? Sometimes it's, if it's in a quote unquote holiday, or maybe it's a Sunday, you have some time that you're not, you know I'm going to say free. You have some quote unquote free time. You go over to Massachusetts, over to, Stockbridge or North Egremont. There were large Black communities there. And some of those were our relatives. So people would go and, take some time and go visit there. So there definitely was that kind of movement. And Massachusetts was, it was kind of because the enslavement had been abolished there so much earlier, there really was a different atmosphere, I
Hmm.
think,
Hmm.
there. And also, I will say, and I don't know how many people know this, but part of the reason that Massachusetts abolished slavery was because of an enslaved woman who was originally from Claverack, which
Huh.
is kind of special. I think it's important to, like, talk about those, how those things occurred.
Tell
But
me
that
more.
was
When you said that, my mind jumped to W.E.B. Du Bois, but tell me more about
yes.
this woman from Claverack.
So this woman from Claverack, her name was Elizabeth Freeman. She was enslaved to the Hugaboom family in Claverack. Mr. Hugaboom's daughter was marrying a man named John Ashley, who was from, I believe it was Stockbridge. And Mr. Hugaboom said, I'm going to give you Elizabeth as a wedding gift, and you take her to Massachusetts with you.
Wow.
So, and there she went. And as the legend is told, John Ashley was he was a prominent lawyer, and he was on one of the committees in Massachusetts that was involved in the Constitution. Like, I don't know if it was the Constitutional Convention there or if it was working on the Declaration, but he was involved in, and he had some other prominent people in the House, and she overheard a conversation about them talking about the Declaration of Independence and all men are created equal. And she said, well, wait a sec. If all men are created equal, that includes me too. And she went to one of their neighbors and talked to them, and they started a legal case. And she sued for her freedom, hers and another enslaved man in the household named Brahm. And they won. And the legislation, the outcome of that case was the basis for the legislation that abolished enslavement in Massachusetts.
And was that
So,
also the same thing in New York? Like, did it contribute to the gradual and later abolishment of it in New York?
so I don't think that her case in particular was related to New York. I think it was more the idea that all of our neighboring states were had were in various levels of abolishment at that point. Um, but it's interesting the way slavery was ended in New York State. There was a lot of back and forth. It took a long time. There was a lot of conversation about how this should happen. And the New York Manumission Society would say one thing, and then the Senate would say something else, and then the Assembly would, and it was just going round and around and around. And Columbia County, by being mostly settled, and still at that point, most of the citizens were of Dutch descent. The Dutch didn't want to let go. They really had a very strong sense of property rights, and we are not giving up our property.
Okay, all right.
And if you force us to give up our property, you will compensate us. And that held up abolition for quite a while, because they were like, no, this is my property. I made an investment here, right? This is my human property. So I'm not giving it up. And if you make me, then you need to compensate me. And then, of course, the question becomes, how do you compensate somebody for, their investment? Because it can't just be like a dollars, or I guess at that point it was pounds to pounds exchange.
Did that happen? I mean, did those slave owners in New York get some compensation?
Well, what they got was the free labor of the children of the people who were enslaved, right? So the way it worked was, they said in 1799, whoever was enslaved was alive and enslaved before that point would remain enslaved for the rest of their lives. But their children would remain, quote unquote, indentured servants, free labor, to the owners of the mother until they turned, I believe it's 25 if they were a girl and 28 if they were a man. So ostensibly, the enslavers got an extra 20 years, 25, 28, whatever years of free labor, and that was their compensation. So it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky situation the way they did it.
It is, and then you think about later, child labor laws. Again, we were talking in the 1900s, but you think that none of that applied to the enslaved people. I mean, so kids, whatever, 4 or 5 years old, whenever functionally they could do things, they were constricted into doing those things.
Right, absolutely. They were doing labor. They were working the fields.
Oh my God.
They were, doing all the same things, basically. The one thing that I will say is a little bit different is that among the Dutch families, there was a common thing where they would give, quote unquote, their child an enslaved person about the same age. So like the child is 4 years old, they're going to get an enslaved person that is all theirs, that's about the same age. And those two grow up together, right? They do things together. They experience things together, which is really, I think, different than, the kind of thought that you have about, what childhood is like, for those kids. And not to say that they had, privileges, but they were able to grow up alongside, the children of their owners. And I think actually that, to my mind, that creates a different kind of intimacy, I will say, in relationships,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because they're children. They're not necessarily seeing all of the discriminatory practices in the same way that adults would, right? They're just like, oh, this is my playmate to a certain degree, So I think that changes the relationship a little bit between white and black children
Interesting.
if they can grow up that way. But that's not to say that they weren't also working. They weren't also doing all the things that they needed to do as property, as human property.
Well, I wondered, and that dynamic must have been so difficult because children, like you said, they're innocent and they don't have these other reference points. But I think one of the probably standing rules was that the slave owners' kids were in charge of
Oh
this
yeah.
of this situation, and so I don't know how they did they view them as an equal, as a servant, as a. It must have been a really difficult sort of line to walk to say, we're the same, but we're not the same. And I see how my parent is treated by your parent. It really is,
Hmm.
I think, a very confusing sort of dynamic. I mean, you gain a certain familiarity, but then you're still on the outside. You're still the other.
Right.
So
Right.
it,
And you think about how children are, the different developmental periods that children go through, right? So they get to a point where like they're kind of mean to each other,
yes,
you
yes,
know?
yeah, I was thinking
So
that.
how much more mean are you to your quote unquote slave than you
Wow.
are to your playmate down the road, right? Or, you know, what bullying kind of things can you
Oof.
do to them? I mean, that's so you definitely, like, you could be friends. You could be friends when you're 4 and then be, master servant when you're 8, and then you're 10 and I'm bullying you. Like there's probably a whole range of things that go through that relationship goes through, you know?
Right.
I
I
mean, I
mean,
think
yeah.
about my kids growing up, like, even with their close friends, like, the relationships change as you learn and you grow and you see what's going on in your environment. Your relationships change.
Right. And this goes back to the sort of protective environment that the parents had to have because they had to say, well, you might think you could do this, but if you do this, then you're in peril. And there's
Right.
nothing I can do to help you in this situation. If
Mm-hmm.
you anger this child or the master, then the punishment that may happen is something that they have, no, like you said, no agency, no way to control it, no way to protect their child.
Right. Right. I mean, imagine if you're the parent of an enslaved child and you see your child being abused or whatever, punished by another, 8-year-old child, but you can't do anything about it.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just, I can't imagine that as a parent.
this is why what you do is so important because even in this discussion, I'm starting to see, and yes, this is many, many generations ago, but you start to think about the way that we still interact among each other,
Hmm.
people of color, especially African Americans here. And you start to understand maybe some of the historical roots of some of this behavior. And then if you can put it in context, again, because some of these things kind of get passed down and you have mixed singles even generations away that you don't really understand the origin of. And
Right.
now as we're talking about it, I'm like, whoa, now I get this. Now I get why there's so many mixed messages, and we often talk about but there's a lack of unity, in our community, and we don't understand the psychological war that was really waged against enslaved people and here. So it's not just the physical brutality and exploitation; it's the psychological damage and the sort of traumatic stress historically that gets passed
Right.
down. That it's hard to quantify, but it's still there if you never deal with it.
Right. Right. It's the same. It's what they call generational trauma.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is. You, we live with the legacy of what our ancestors lived with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And listen, those cycles are really hard to break, clearly, because if they weren't hard to break, our country wouldn't be where it is right now. But
Right. Right.
like we
Right.
would have, we would have already dealt with all of this, and we haven't.
I know this is out of your immediate bailiwick in terms of the history, but
Hmm.
when you look at countries that have had to deal with traumatic instances of what they've done, and I had a lady on. She owns a. And forgive me for not remembering her name. I'm just getting to that age where names escape me. But I know who she is. I know where she is. I know who she is. But she's from a German heritage, and we talked a little bit about the Truth and Reconciliation and the trials that happened and how they kind of dug into what happened, and they were able to come to levels, them and a bit in South Africa,
Sure.
come to a bit of a cultural understanding and about what happened. And I'm assuming apologies were happened, and there was some conversations as a way to transition those things. Where in America, there hasn't been any of those conversations about
No.
this is what happened, this is what we did. Never, as we talked about, there's been no reparations. There have been no sort of conversations about this. And some would say, our contribution is that we fought a war to end that, which is not entirely true at all.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So you didn't fight a war. As a matter of fact, we fought the war in many cases to help you to help the North to win. So,
Right.
but there are these attitudes that say, and so, like kind of like you're welcome. Like, no, we're not welcome. We're not even. So, but I think
That's
it is
yeah.
important to have this, like what you're doing, having this information, having these facts, having people be able to look back and understand what happened. Again, the survival and the fortitude and the sustainability that these folks had in their minds, our ancestors, to be able to move forward and create this brighter day. And then you look at the context and say, but now there's a backlash of that brighter day.
Right. Right. It's interesting. Like if you look at, say, Germany, right, post World War II,
Yes.
they dealt with their stuff.
Yes.
It was in the school curricula. There were social events. There were all kinds of things put into their society for them to deal with what happened during World War II. We've never done that. We have now. It's interesting because we did give reparations to the Japanese.
Yes.
That we had in internment camps.
Yes.
That we did. But Native Americans and Black Americans, no, they've gotten nothing. And I think it's really an interesting, like, why can we do it for one group and not for another group? Why can we do it in one time period and not another time period? And I do think, like, right now, it's like we're living in the 1880s, right? Like the parallels of, after the Civil War, during reparations, there were Black people elected to Congress.
Yes,
there were Black people voting, owning property. And after just a few years of that, some people were like, oh, no, we can't have that. We're going to take all that back. We're going to terrorize you to the point of not being able to achieve that. And it's kind of the same now, right? We had 8 years of a Black president. And now we have people going, oh, no, we can't have that. We're taking that away from you.
Oh, this is deep. Are you saying that this is a new Jim Crow era, a return?
Listen, far be it for me to, make that claim, but I look at the parallels.
Yeah, I
the
agree.
Parallels.
And you put this in the context of, of history and now we're looking at what's happening with the immigrants and undocumented people here in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
again, and my parallel to Germany is, they started with the most vulnerable populations, and then they moved their way across to everyone else. So I'm seeing what they're doing here. And first they say, "Oh, this is only going to be for the criminals and the worst of the violent, dangerous people." But that's not how it's
Mm-hmm.
really reading out. But it's also now, does that now in a short time accelerate to it's the undocumented people, it's people that commit crimes, it's people that are my political enemies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are we on that train, and people who don't know the history really can't see where this train is headed?
Listen, I will say one thing. The Germans studied our Jim Crow policies to come up with,
That's right.
develop what they did in World War II. So yeah, I think there's something to be said for, yeah, they would like us to be on that path. Whether or not we can stop it
Hmm.
is, you know, is I'm hopeful, but I don't know. But I definitely think that's the path they would like us on. Yes.
Well,
You
and
know.
then you think about the sort of freedom fighters and freedom and justice fighters, and you look now and you see people, people all over. You obviously have President Obama speaking out. You have Letitia James, who
Mm-hmm.
held Trump to account and won these cases. You have Alvin Bragg. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you always see that because freedom and justice, and of course Dr. King and so
Right.
many others, is so essential to our being and understanding of the world. We are here in 2026 on the forefront of defending this democracy that has
Mm-hmm.
been not especially kind or just to us, but still trying to defend the institution because we do understand the importance of justice, of equity, of freedom.
I have so many thoughts about that
Okay.
because on the you're getting deep now. You're getting deep now. On the one hand, yes, we do have these sort of larger than life people who are out here saying these things and people that we can look to, but ultimately, until we all as citizens get on board and do what we can do,
Hmm.
nothing changes, right? Because you can have 10 people who have power speaking out, but we are the power behind that power,
Hmm.
right? So we have to do the work. So there's that.
But it takes
I
bravery to do
also
that, though. It does take bravery, an immense amount of bravery to stand up. And again, as we look back at the legacy and say, and I am so proud that all of the people that my predecessors, my grandparents, their grandparents, they stood up and say, "I will not die in this field. I will not die
mhm
in this
mhm
exploitation. I will not die." And generation by generation by generation made the progress, saying, "My kids will have more and better opportunities than I will have." And march
right.
through that time in history. And I do feel like we have that instinctual bravery, which is to be celebrated. I mean, in a way, is not Black History Month because it wasn't really made for us, right? It was made
Mhm.
so that white Americans could understand kind of who we were and who we are, and
Right.
appreciate that in a deeper way than the marginalizations that had occurred all throughout the American experience.
Mhm. Mhm. Um Nothing, no major change ever comes about without a lot of people taking a lot of big risks.
Yes.
And that's where we are now. We have to have create a major change if we are going to survive, if our country is going to survive, if what we call our democracy is going to survive. We all have to start taking risks, and they're scary. I mean, listen, I'm not brave. Like, not in that way anyway. Um, but we all have to take whatever risks we can in order to save ourselves and save the world for our children,
Yes.
right? Because,
Yes.
like you're saying, it's all about what the audacious optimism of being able to consider that your children are going to live in a better world, and how do you get that better world to come about for them, you know. I think also our democracy. based on the Constitution was not written for us. It was
Right.
not written for Black people.
Right.
We were not included. It was actually written about Black people, right? They three-fifths compromise that was about Black people. Um, uh, so many of the laws that we've enacted have been about Black people. I think it's kind of like right now, a lot of people are all, rah, rah, America, Constitution, this and that. But I think you really have to understand what the Constitution was, because to be fair, the Constitution is kind of working as they intended it to. It was
Well,
not for us,
if you're an originalist, right? Because
Right,
after the
exactly.
amendments to the Constitution, which I think are under attack, but those are the ones that enshrined some level of rights and quantifiable freedoms. But the original Constitution did not.
Right, exactly. And we have an originalist Supreme Court, the majority anyway. And the people who are in power now, many of them are going by the original Constitution. And that does not help. It doesn't help Black people. It doesn't help Native American people.
Doesn't
It
help
doesn't
women.
help women. It does, right, exactly. Like there are a lot of us who it doesn't help. And
And it
listen,
doesn't
I am as
help
patriotic as
non-land
anybody.
owning whites.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. That's the thing. Also, the lower middle class and lower class socioeconomically white people in this country are not benefiting at all from what this government is doing. But
right.
I will say a lot of them have been brainwashed by a lot of the rhetoric. I think, at least that's the way I see it.
And
Otherwise, how do we
if you
elect
look
this
back at it,
president?
and I want to mention it, but I'm forgetting the name, but not, oh my goodness, the revolt, was it Brown's revolt?
John Brown?
Yeah, it's. Hold on, I gotta look this up. Keep going, but it was a
Hmm.
revolt where black and whites got together and revolted against blacks and pre-blacks and lower income whites got together, and in that time, the power structure understood that people getting together was bad, and sort of the
Right,
now the
right.
cloak of whiteness now sort of was created.
Absolutely. Bacon's Rebellion.
That's it, Bacon's. I know it's with a
Yeah.
B. Thank you.
Yep. Yep.
I knew
Yep.
you would save me.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, once we unite and we all say, hey, wait, this isn't right, that's when things happen. But we all have to say it, we all have to take the risk. And we are not at that point yet where everyone's ready to get together and take the risk. And that's the part that scares me, because will we be at that point, in the next 2 years? Hopefully, but who knows?
Well, how bad
Who
the
knows?
question is how bad the things have to be until people get together. But if you don't know your past, then you are doomed to repeat it. So the saying goes.
Exactly.
And that's why
Exactly.
it's so important what you're doing, and the conversation with the community and helping people to explore and understand this was what happened, and not let the powers that be try to minimize this or sweep this under the rug or try to give some sort of good feel good narrative over the past that has happened here. And we need to
Hmm.
really deal with the facts and extrapolate the lessons of that history has taught us, so we don't fall back to ways that were terrible for most.
Right, exactly. And if there's one thing that I want people to be able to take from my work, it's that this history deserves to be known by everybody and experienced by everybody, and everyone needs to be able to take it in, internalize it. It's not, to me, I mean, I know there's like a lot of, guilt and shame and blame and all of those things. To me, it's not about that. This is not talking about our history of enslavement is not comfortable for anybody, right? It's not comfortable for me to say to any white person, your ancestor owned my ancestor, and it's not comfortable for them to say that the opposite, right? So we all need to sit in our discomfort
Hmm.
in order to be able to overcome it and get past it and deal with it and move on to a better place, right? But it's hard to sit in discomfort.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't want to do that. Ooh, it makes me feel bad. It makes me feel guilty. It makes me feel this and that. I mean, yeah, we have feelings, It doesn't make me comfortable to know that my ancestors had no agency over their lives either.
Right.
So
But
it's not comfortable for anybody. We all need to deal with it.
right. And, not every conversation has to feel good, and you can disagree without being disagreeable. I mean, there's always these tools that we have to now talk these things out, but we do have to have a foundational truth and understanding of what the true history was, and so that we could accurately frame how we could proceed in the future. And again,
Right.
that's why what you do is so important. I want you to tell people about your website. We only have a few minutes left, and it's always so fascinating talking to you. And but tell people how people can get a hold of you, your website, and all those things.
Okay. Well, listen, we are on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
And this is the Columbia
We are
County
it's
Black Archives.
So it's the African American
Okay,
Archives of Columbia County, and
thank you.
usually almost everywhere our handle is AFAM Archive CC. So it's AFAM Archive CC. So Facebook, Instagram, our website is the same. It's www.afmarchivecc.org. I think my next speaking engagement is March 15th in East Greenbush at the East Greenbush Library with their Historical Society. So definitely hit me up there. Come talk, ask me all the questions. And again, we'll be doing, other things. We will be doing May 16th, I believe it is, the Saturday. We will be having the now third annual Columbia County Pinkster Fest, original Kinderhook Black Family Reunion. And that will be in Kinderhook at Rothermel Park. It's going to be a long day of activities. We have dancers and drummers and speakers and a little marketplace, all these things lined up. It's going to be a lot of fun. It also includes in the morning, I believe from 11 to 12, there will be a gathering for Black descendants of enslaved people in Columbia County. So if you have Black ancestry in Columbia County, definitely come in the morning because we'll be talking about genealogy. We'll be talking about the things that we've learned, helping people um, find out about their own genealogy. There will be a ceremony at the
Okay,
historic.
we got to wrap it. We got to wrap. We only have
Okay.
just a few
Okay.
seconds
All right.
left.
Anyway, May 16th, come to Kinderhook. March 15th, come to East Greenbush. And yeah,
Well, thank you
us.
so
Thank you.
much, Lisa Fludd-Smith. And please check out our organization. Wonderful talking to you. We will have you back on because, Black history is American history, so we don't have to wait till February to talk about it. So thank you so much for being on. And that does it for this Tuesday afternoon radio show. With your host, Randall Martin, thank you so much for stopping by, and we will see you next time.